Welcome, everyone. My name is Ben Chamberlain. I look after the product management and marketing function at UMT, and welcome to today's webcast, Defining a Model to Effectively Run the Business of IT. This is the first session in a three-part webcast series where we're going to look into key concepts of running the business of IT with a specific focus on driving financial transparency across the project, the application, and your infrastructure portfolios. It's a privilege for me to have Charlie Curcio with us today, who's going to lead us through a majority of this session. Before I introduce Charlie, just some housekeeping. Looks like I need to mute lines with it when anyone that joins the conference. So if you do join the conference, please mute your own line, just so we don't interfere with the recording. Also, we will be pausing at the end for questions and answers. So please use the Q&A manager in live meeting to post any questions you may have. And we'll get to them at the end. Common questions usually are, will the slides be available? Yes, they will. You will receive those slides after the meeting. We're also recording this meeting as well, so you'll be able to get access to the recording within 24 hours or so after the meeting. So let me, before handing over to Charlie, first introduce Charlie. Charlie Curcio is a financial management consultant currently serving on UMT's Technology Advisory Committee. He is a former Vice President and Corporate Services CFO of MetLife, where he was responsible for all financial management and reporting activities, supporting all corporate service areas, including global technology and operations. Prior to MetLife, Charlie was the Senior VP and CFO of the Technology and Operations Group at AXA Equitable. He was responsible for enterprise-wide business continuity, project management, and Six Sigma. He has also participated in the AXA Group's global IT organization on initiatives that supported the creation of a world-class global technology service organization. Charlie earned a BA in accounting from Queen's College and an MBA in finance from Adelphi University. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Charlie.
Thanks, Ben, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. I'm very happy to be kicking off the first of the three-part UMT webcast series, and I'd like to welcome the over 250 registered attendees from all over the world. Today's topic, as Ben mentioned, is defining a model to effectively run the business of IT. And I'm guessing that many of you have heard of running the business of IT, or sometimes it's called running IT like a business. For those of you who have, by the end of this presentation, I think you'll have more clarity and a better understanding of running the business of IT. For those of you who have not heard about it, I plan to connect the dots to as what it is and why it's important in creating a high-performing IT organization. And I'm going to talk from my experience as an IT CFO for two Fortune 30-size companies. So let's get started. I'm going to run through the agenda again. So I'm going to break down my discussion into three segments, followed by a short Q&A. First, running the business of IT. And this is the basis for creating a high-performing IT organization where you create business flexibility, a lower TCO or total cost of ownership, and faster time to value. We're then going to talk about data management and breaking down the domains, application development versus infrastructure, and how you look at data management and hopefully demystify the domains. And then I'm going to leave you with some things that you might want to think about regarding your strategy for moving forward. Another thing we're going to do during the course of the presentation is we're going to have two interactive pollings, and that's where you have an opportunity to answer a question, and we'll provide real-time results, so that sounds like it'll be fun for the group. So let's get started with running the business of IT. And if I think about the IT landscape, that's a question I hear about all the time around technology. And so we want to talk a little bit about that. And I want you to think about your own companies and see if some of these things resonate with you. And so just on the first tile, this idea of a cost center or business driver. This is how IT organizations sometimes are perceived. And a lot of times IT is seen as a cost center. They get a bad rap. And it's important to change that perception. And one of the CIOs that I worked for actually came out with an idea. It was a bit of a marketing thing, but it actually turned into kind of a battle cry, and it was IT fuels revenue and earnings growth. And we talked about that with the teams in IT as well as with our business partners, and we tried to make the connections. And that went a long way to starting to change the mindset. This next one, this idea of minimize spend or maximize value, we always hear about cutting IT expenses, but in my experience, spending less doesn't always lead to value. It's more important how you spend the dollars, and we're going to talk more about that when we get deeper into the presentation. This next one, this order taker or business partner, the only thing I would say about that to make it clear is that you're either at the table or you're on the menu. It's almost that simple. This next one, as an IT CFO, this was always my worst nightmare, this concept of being an IT black hole or transparent. And a lot of it had to do with the chargebacks and the ability to present an understandable invoice of IT to the business customers and help them understand what they have control over within IT. Centralized or decentralized. There's no right answer here, but there are ways to optimize the organization by the way you structure it, where you have opportunities to leverage things across the organization, such as infrastructure, and perhaps focus more on businesses on the application side and be selectively decentralized. So, again, no right or wrong way, but it's something to think about and be very deliberate about. And then this last one, this disjointed or cohesive, I threw that in there because my experience has been that the IT teams don't always work well together. The application side and the infrastructure side, sometimes they're at odds with each other. And the fact is that the application people are typically the customer-facing IT organization, and the infrastructure is a bit in the background. And so that creates some tension. And there's also tension sometimes in the project manager ranks and the finance team ranks. And so I think that's important to think about the perception of your organization, because if you are going to be a high-performing IT organization, you're going to want your teams to work closely together. And so positioning is critical to creating that high-performing IT organization. So on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about some of the best practices that I've come across running the business of IT. And I came up with 5 major categories. There's hundreds of things that are underneath here, but I think these 5 categories cover just about everything. And so it starts with strategy, IT governance, financial management, resource management, and business intelligence and metrics. And equally important to these disciplines or best practices is really the senior leadership team, where the CIO, the IT CFO, if there is one, application heads, service heads, architects, et cetera, start to work together and have kind of a common goal around these best practices. And that permeates throughout the organization into developers and program managers, et cetera, and it really helps you pull together the organization and stay focused on running the business of IT. And so on this next slide, I wanted to drill down on each of these categories just a little bit. So starting with strategy, we all have strategy around IT, but it's really about multi-year roadmaps that are directional and flexible. You never want to get backed into a corner or tied into something if the business is changing. And you also want to think about some key elements that are often overlooked, but yet it's a big challenge, and that is decommissioning or decomplexing the environments where they're not sexy projects, so they typically don't get funded in the annual application development budgets, but yet it's important to running an efficient and effective organization. So you want to think about that and build that into your strategy. The next one, business alignment. This is really at the company level and divisional level and looking broadly across the enterprise. And in a couple of places that I've worked in, we've actually looked at the enterprise objectives, and we've tried to align project portfolios to those objectives to make sure that everything we were doing across the enterprise was supporting the goals of the company. The architectural blueprint, this helps us move into new technologies, and it also creates consistency in the environment. And when you have consistency, you can be more efficient. This is a challenge in some areas because sometimes we need technologies that are new technologies, and the first project that comes along that needs that technology gets burdened with the full cost of implementing that, but yet other projects that come along later that use that same technology get a free ride, if you will. And so one of the ways we've dealt with this in my former life is we've created an architectural blueprint, and we thought about what the platforms need to look like, what type of utilities we'll need for the enterprise, and we tried to get ahead of the curve and actually build out some of these so that they weren't on the critical path of some of our projects. And we made a multi-year investment, and we delivered a blueprint that allowed the application portfolio to be delivered more effectively. And then the last item I have on here, capital allocation. As a finance person, I see IT dollars as precious capital, and we always need to take a step back and make sure that we're investing across the entire portfolio appropriately. The next area, the IT governance, this is an enterprise IT governance. So today, I know on the application development side, we're in a much more mature state, and there's a lot of strong program and project management in place, and we align and prioritize the portfolios. But it's actually a broader thought that extends to infrastructure as well as the application development, and it's just a way of behaving around running the business of technology. The strategic alignment is making sure that we are, again, aligned with the company strategically across all our programs and having infrastructure and the application side aligned as well. Capacity management, again, across the portfolio. Sometimes businesses want to increase spend, and we find that we don't have the capacity from a technology perspective. We don't even have the capacity sometimes from a business perspective, and so we can't actually do the things we want to do. So understanding what our resource capacity is, understanding what our infrastructure capacity is an important piece of the puzzle to running the business of IT as well. ROIs and lookbacks. In my experience doing these in a couple of different companies, what I have found is that 2/3 of the projects that we do lookbacks on don't meet their objectives. And so they might not meet their cost objective to deliver, they may not meet their scope objective, and they may not meet their benefit objective. And so if 2/3 of the projects that we sample aren't meeting those objectives and you apply that to the whole portfolio, we're missing the boat on a lot of different things. And the scarier part is that the third that did make their objectives were the smaller projects. And I think we all know that the larger and more complex the projects and the longer time span, the more challenging it is to deliver that project. So ROIs and lookbacks are critical to IT governance. And then risk management, the ability to deliver the portfolio is another aspect, and it's technology risk, it's people risk, it's everything to do with delivering technology. The next item, resource management. I know this is obvious, but it's worth mentioning because people typically make up between 55 and 65% of IT spend. So making sure that we have the right people with the right skill sets is absolutely necessary. Business intelligence and metrics. This is a good area because it's all about outcomes. And I don't know if anyone saw in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago, but Michael Corbat, who's the new Citi CEO, he took his top 300 managers to a conference, and he basically told them, you are what you measure. And he put a metrics process in place to measure how Citigroup is performing. And so that's why this is so important, because it's outcomes-based. It could apply to service levels. You can look at ratios, and we're going to talk a little bit more about ratios, but thinking about how you invest and measuring whether you're investing successfully or not is important. Benchmarks. Benchmarks aren't perfect, but they're helpful. They're directional, and they give us an idea of what's going on in the world outside. And depending on what we're benchmarking, we might actually have some very good measures to tell if we're doing what we need to be doing and we're competitive in what we're doing. And then dashboards and reports is all about getting the right information to the right people in the organization. So it's the ability to measure the organization at the highest level and be able to make decisions and change some of the outcomes. And then finally, last but not least, is IT financial management. And to me, this is near and dear to my heart as an IT CFO. You want the organization, obviously, to be efficient and effective. You want to be smarter and more focused with what you do. And what I would say is a finance head has the same view as the CIO, and that is it looks across all the organizations and all the domains, where each organization is focused primarily on their own organization. And so it's a much different view, and that the financial management aspect is good for the CIO because they get a objective perspective of the entire organization. And so that starts to create accountability and also information management and better transparency through the organization. So leaving off with financial transparency on that slide, I want to talk a little bit more about it because I do know that that is one of the most pressing issues that organizations are facing when it comes to technology. And so it's about changing the conversations with the business. And I'm sure most of us experience the perceptions that I talked about where IT is too expensive, it's a black hole. And what you really want to do is to be able to come to the table and really talk about outcomes, and you want to talk about decisions that could be made. So I put on this chart just a couple of goals and some of the benefits, but to get to this financial transparency, you want to think about things that are consistent and simple. So that's kind of the foundation. The more variables that you change, the more difficult things become for the people that are getting the services to understand. So, you know, in my experience, I've worked with teams that have changed the billing methodology, as an example, multiple times during the year. And all that led to is many discussions around chaos with what changed, and why did the billing change, and what does it mean. And really, we should be talking about the true business is what was your volumes, what were your unit costs, how could you impact or affect that, what decisions could you make that are different. So having it consistent and simple is foundational. Actionable metrics and scorecards, again, you want to have discussions with the business that put the capability in their hands to change their behavior to give them better cost or better service. And so these next two, this idea of variable cost and service offerings and key fixed cost, helping businesses understand what they are. And so one example on the variable cost, you might think about data storage. And there's multiple tiers of data storage, and Tier 1 is far more expensive than Tier 3. So being able to explain those differences to a business and looking at their applications and figure out what's the best level of storage they should be on, how do you optimize that, it helps them make decisions that could lower their cost. But today, we don't always have those discussions, and so the choices are kind of de facto or default, and they might not actually be the right choices. On fixed cost and terms, I don't know that businesses completely understand the nature of IT expenses. I typically say that in the short run, most IT expenses are fixed. And why is that? That is because on the infrastructure side, as an example, if you run a data center or you have equipment, you're into leases, you're into software commitments, and it's not easy to turn on a dime. And so the ability to understand what's fixed and what's variable helps you plan better. And all this information plays into your strategy of what you want to do. And a big challenge here today is as companies move to the cloud, it eliminates the need for the data centers that we've had in the past. And so how do you work that so that you could do that efficiently and effectively if that's what you need to do? And then increased variability. Any expense that you can make variable that people can dial up or down actually gives you a lot of flexibility with the business. And so the idea is know what costs you have today are variable, know what's fixed, figure out how you can variabilize as much as you could so that you have better choices. On the benefit side, there's many benefits. I put a couple here, but this informed decision-making is all about having the facts before making a decision. Proactively managing across the entire IT portfolio, and that's really linking the application side with the infrastructure side, because as we all know, once we deliver applications, they're run on the infrastructure, and so there's some natural connection there to understand what's going on the infrastructure side as well as what's going on the application side and how they relate. This next one, the enhanced ability to do planning and forecasting, to me this is very, very important for a couple of reasons. One is that when the company gives its earnings estimates, if you don't forecast properly, a company will not hit those numbers as they planned. And the one thing that's worse than coming in under your estimates or over your estimates is coming in over, under, and not actually knowing you were going to come in over, under. So it's about predictability here. But the other thing that people don't typically think about is the lost opportunity if you are actually coming in under your forecast. And in my experience, many IT organizations are underspending in the first quarter or two of the year, but yet they predict that they're going to spend all the money by the end of the year. And as you come to the end of the year, you find out that you actually can't do that. And what that represents is a lost opportunity, because if you were to have come in 10% under and didn't plan for it or predict, you actually lose those dollars. But if you had known about it earlier in the year, you could have either planned to take it to the bottom line, or you could have planned to invest it in some other areas like decommissioning a system or decomplexing a system where you could have added some value. So that represents some lost opportunities there. The next one, focusing on providing insights and analytics instead of explaining chargebacks. If we can get to that point as a finance group, I think that that's a big win, because the conversations start to change with the business and the perception of IT starts to change as well, because they start to understand what's happening. And then finally, the industry benchmarks. Again, this gives you a sense of what's going on outside your organization. Are you doing better or worse, and what areas that you need to look into to really get a handle on your business of running IT relative to what it looks like in other places. And so many benefits that come out of this financial transparency. So the last slide in this section is what I call the IT house. And the reason I put this together is, we talked about running IT like a business. We talked about financial transparency. And now, how do you apply it to the IT organization? And so this is the way I usually approached it. So on the bottom of the house, we have strategy, architecture, and management. And that's the CIO and some of the people that are leveraged across the entire technology organization. And on the left side, we have the application group, and on the right side, we have the infrastructure group. And then the roof of the house is basically collecting all this information to get a handle on what your total cost of ownership is, and it's the basis for your chargebacks, because you want to be able to explain 100% of the IT expenses. The way I look at applications is in two broad buckets. One is maintenance and break fix, so that's really just keeping the application running. And the other piece of that is what I call development projects, and there's three buckets that I put projects into: new development, enhancements, and legal and regulatory. And some of you might be saying, well, isn't legal and regulatory really a maintenance project? And I would say you could make that argument, but in my experience, I've seen legal and regulatory projects end up as pork barrel projects where once you have a legal and regulatory imperative, people stuff a lot of other things into it. And so I treat it as a development project to make sure that the lens that we look at that is different than just the maintenance and break fix. On the right side of the house is the infrastructure, and I have that broken into two buckets. Services, which is basically keeping the environment running, everything from mainframe to servers to your storage to your end-user computing. And then there's another bucket that's called efficiency and performance tuning projects. And the reason I look at it this way is because infrastructure needs to invest every year to make sure not only that they're being very efficient and effective, but to make sure that they're creating capacity for the new development work that's coming over the fence each cycle. And so every year as we look at our development portfolio and we add new capabilities and new systems and so forth, it actually drives infrastructure volume, and the infrastructure team has to make sure that they can handle that volume. And so the parallels are maintenance and break fix on the application side is a lot like the services on the infrastructure side, where you're really focused on efficiency and availability. You want to deliver those services the way you're supposed to at the least possible cost. And on the development projects and the efficiency and performance tuning, what you want to do is you want to optimize your projects. You want to make sure that you're picking the right projects, that you're getting the right value and the right return out of those. And on the infrastructure side, you want to make sure that you're creating that capacity so that you're able to lower your cost and absorb the work that's coming over the fence. And so I'm going to just pause right now. I'm going to turn it back over to Ben, where he's going to do the first polling question.
Okay, so you should be seeing the first polling question on your screen. So please select the answer that best describes your organization's IT financial management or ITFM status. The polls will remain open for 20 seconds or so. So the polling's slowing down. So what we can see currently, we have almost a tie for first place between 34% of we have implemented an ITFM process and tool. The next highest, actually the highest now, is we've started to implement ITFM process and tool. With the remainder on we intend to or have no plans at this stage. So that's great. Thanks for that. We can close the poll and get back to the main branch of the presentation.
Okay, good. Well, it's good to see that a large majority of the listeners here have either started or plan to start developing that tool. So, and you're going to hear some good reasons why as we move on to the next segment. So the next slide is average 2012 IT spends. This is Gartner information. And it breaks down application, infrastructure, and IT management. And so your mileage may vary because this is made up of many different industries and many different companies. But I think you could, if you have this data for your organization, you can align it with this and see how you stack up. In my experience, I've walked into organizations that looked a lot like this. And part of my goal as an IT CFO and helping the CIO run IT like a business was to actually change this mix and obviously minimize the management, the IT management piece, and increase the application piece and reduce the infrastructure piece. And I'm going to get into why that's important, but at the highest level, this is a bit of the capital allocation picture that I talked about. And without looking at things this way, I think you miss the opportunity to maximize your value. So it's a about getting the domains right and understanding what you want it to look like. So Gartner defines this emerging market as integrated IT portfolio analysis. And so today, a lot of companies do PPM or project portfolio management very well. It's a mature market today. A lot of companies have been doing it for a lot of time. But this integrated IT portfolio is a much broader view. And it's one that creates a single IT portfolio where you understand relationships and dependencies across all of IT. And so when you think about it, it's accurate and reliable data. It's driving financial transparency and control, the ability to analyze and collaborate and drive fact-based decisions, and then being able to build and communicate a multi-year transformation roadmap. And that last one's important because in the organizations that I've worked in, we've always had a multi-year plan, typically 2 to 3 years, that included a lot of elements of the things that I'm talking about, where it was about the business of IT and it was about the technology, but it was also about the financial management around IT and thinking of how we want to position ourselves. And UMT has been positioned as a visionary in this space. Some of you might know UMT from the project portfolio management space, where they're clearly a leader and a visionary there, and they're approaching this IIPA space as well. So let's break down the domains. We'll talk about data management, and I'm going to talk broadly about data management and what are some of the key challenges. So I'll just run through each of these icons briefly, but the first one, disparate domains and systems. We all use a variety of systems: Clarity, SAP, PeopleSoft, Mercury. We have homegrown systems. We have spreadsheets, but yet they don't talk to each other. So we have a lot of information, but it's all over the place. The next one, the underlying data is flawed. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a slide, but this is really a serious issue because if the data is flawed, you can't make good decisions. And what's worse is if the data is flawed and you don't know it, you're actually making poor decisions. So getting that right is important. The idea of frequency of IT planning. It's usually an annual process. It's very drawn out. It's disconnected at best. And so we want to think about the IT planning a little bit differently. And one of the things that I've done is implemented a rolling 4-quarter forecast, which morphed into ultimately a rolling 12-quarter forecast around IT. And while the out quarters are not perfect, they are directional. And what it does is it gets people to focus on IT on a rolling basis, and you start to address issues earlier than you would with an annual process. So that's something to think about. Manual and time consuming. We all know with spreadsheets and doing manual work, it's prone to error, takes a lot of time, sometimes it's not repeatable, and so that's a challenge that we have today. This inadequate management reporting. I've seen stacks and stacks of paper that have all sorts of data around technology, but none of it really helps people make decisions or gives them a bird's eye view of what's happening. And so management reporting is a key challenge because we have lots of data, we just don't know what to do with it. And then this last icon I put in here, because I've heard this many times, and that's when I ask teams for information or data or reports, they basically say to me, well, we don't do it today. And when I ask why not, they say no one's ever asked for it. So part of the data management strategy is actually knowing what to ask for. So now let's move to the application side of the house, and we'll drill down on data management from that perspective. So on the left, the small pie chart is what I had originally showed you, the Gartner slide on 2012 spend. And we've taken the application piece and we've exploded that into what's maintenance and what's development. And maintenance is 46%, development's 54%. So that's good because we're investing more in development than we are maintenance. But how do we know what the right number is? In my experience, I've moved this chart about 65% development and 35% maintenance. And there's lots of different ways to think about that and to accomplish that, but the key thing is knowing what you look like today and figuring out where you want to go and how you're going to get there. So on the application side, today I talked about the fact that we're pretty mature on the IT project portfolio management. We align the projects to the business and IT strategies. We deliver on time, budget, scope. Hopefully we do business cases, ROIs, and look backs and all that stuff. But we treat it like a silo. And so to get to this concept of integrated IT portfolio analysis, you want to look across the entire IT organization, and you want to think about how you drive value creation. And the way I describe that is there's value-creating activities and value-sustaining activities. And what you want to do is look at that ratio. And so, off the top of my head, if I looked at just the application side, I would say that the development would be considered value-creating and the maintenance would be value-sustaining. And so the idea would be to drive that ratio so that the bigger ratio on development, the more projects you can do and the more value that you can create. And there's a couple of ways to do it. One way is just reducing maintenance and increasing development, but another one is thinking about driving down unit cost and creating capacity. And there's a number of different ways to do that, from the way you organize, from the way you source. And so thinking about application development and unit cost and driving value is important. The integration with infrastructure. As I mentioned, the work that we do today around new applications or enhancements invariably drives more infrastructure cost. And the decisions we make about the technologies that we pick or how we utilize those technologies could be driving up infrastructure cost, and we might not even be aware of it. So linking the two together, and from an application and an infrastructure side and looking end-to-end at the life of an application, you can make better decisions about the technologies and about the utilization. And then finally, on application rationalization, everyone I talk to is saddled with the same problems. They have many old, antiquated systems. They're expensive to make changes to. They take a lot of time, but yet we can't get out of our own way and decommission or decomplex that environment because we're running so fast to do the new development. But we need to step back and think about rationalizing our applications and also knowing what it costs to own and maintain an application. A lot of us think that applications are once and done, but I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to find that we might put in a new application this year, but every year we're putting enhancements into that. So over time, that application could cost 1.5 or 2 times what we invested initially and have a big infrastructure cost. So the ability to look at applications end to end and understand what your total cost of ownership is critical to getting the application side of the house right. This next slide is what I call the building blocks, and it really starts with some basic information such as data quality. In order to make sure that we're managing our overall portfolio properly, we want to make sure that the data quality is correct. I think on individual project basis, we have project managers overseeing projects and they're making sure that they're delivering them. But when we step back from the overall portfolio and we think of hundreds and even thousands of projects to go on, how comfortable do we feel about the entire portfolio? So this idea of data quality and understanding what our resource utilization is. Do we have time reporting in place? I know a lot of companies don't use time reporting, but I think to really be effective and efficient, you have to think about time reporting and are people reporting their time properly. I think the spend buckets are critical, getting them right, because what we find is that a lot of people treat things as maintenance when they're actually enhancements. And so it's hard then to get a good handle on what your true maintenance cost or your true run the application cost is, because it's got all this other stuff in there. And we've cleansed these buckets by having good definitions that everyone follows so that you can understand where you're spending your money whether it's new enhancements or maintenance or legal or regulatory, and then you could start making some decisions. And I've seen decisions made where we looked at so many small enhancements that did not really individually add a lot of value, that we changed the way we looked at them, and we tried to limit the number of small enhancements, and we took some of that money and we used it to put into some major projects that really drove value. And so having the transparency into your portfolio in aggregate is important. The accounting aspect, the SOP 98-1 capitalized software, the ability to know what phases people are working on the project so that you can manage your capitalization better. And another one that I don't have on here but is important is the federal and state government gives tax credits for research and experimentation on IT activities. And by knowing what your projects are, understanding them across the portfolio, you're able to get tax credits. And I've actually done that in one of the companies that I've worked in, where we were able to significantly increase the amount of the tax credit because we were able to demonstrate that our projects were actually fitting that profile. And so that's another important aspect, and that drives money directly to the bottom line. And then this idea of project start and end dates. Typically, if I looked at the portfolio, all the start dates would be January 1st and all the end dates would be December 31st. And we all know that's not good data. And so it really doesn't help you plan your resources and think about the portfolio in the right way. And so collectively, having the ability to feel comfortable with your data quality is important, because then you could start to move up this triangle and think about what are the right data elements that you want to look at. So software development is mostly people, and so you're going to want to focus on what your labor costs are. You're going to look at what your consultant costs are, and you're going to want to think about the types of consultants you have, whether you have time and material consultants, whether you have fixed price contracts, whether you have offshore, whether you have nearshore, because they all have different cost profiles and a different impact on your portfolio. So you're really going to want to get at that and understand what that looks like. And you're also going to want to take a look at the resources against your projects and understand what that looks like as well, because that's telling to how hard or how easy the delivery will be. And then at the top of the pyramid is what I call actionable information. That's where you can really get to feel the portfolio alignment. You can understand the capacity, where your people are concentrated, where they need to be concentrated. You get the sense of the number of projects you have. I mean, a lot of times I've looked at project portfolios, and there were just so many projects created that you couldn't possibly manage them all. And what we found at times is that there were really projects that belonged together, and as you grouped projects into programs or key initiatives, everything became a little bit more manageable and everything had a little better visibility. So understanding that, understanding what your development life cycle is, where you're investing your development spend, what's your analytics, what's your coding, what's your implementation, what does that look like? What does your sourcing ratio look like? Do you know what your unit costs are? Do you know across the entire portfolio what your profile looks like for delivering on time and on budget? So from an application perspective, I know we're pretty mature on project portfolio management, but again, to really run IT like a business, you want to take a step further back and you want to look across the entire portfolio, and you want to look for some different things than you've traditionally looked at. So let's shift gears and let's talk about the infrastructure side of the house. And that's a little bit different than the application side. And you can see from the pie chart here, this is the Gartner pie chart I showed you earlier, and taking that ratio of infrastructure and then exploding it into the components of infrastructure, it looks different than application because application is mostly people, infrastructure is less people, and it's more about software, equipment, and facilities. And so when you look at this, you have all the different domains with data center, end user computing, service desk, et cetera. And so this has to be looked at a little bit differently, but like I said, the four major expenses, employees, your consultants or contracted services, a lot of us source services to Siemens or AT&T, et cetera. We have hardware, software, and so these types of services are leveraged across the entire organization. So they're a little bit more challenging to get our arms around. But as we flip to the next slide and I think about what I call running the factory today, it's all about systems performance and availability. It's about this idea of doing ongoing performance tuning to create efficiencies in the organization. It's about capacity planning. This is a real challenge for infrastructure folks because of that challenge between the AD side and the infrastructure side. They don't have good capacity numbers on the new projects that are coming online, and sometimes they don't even have good information about the existing project portfolio and the existing applications. And so what you typically find for capacity planning is let's take what our last year's was and add 5%, and that may not actually be the right answer. On the infrastructure side, it's about managing equipment and it's about managing vendors. So infrastructure, a shared service, lack of transparency, and a lack of connectivity. And so the question is, how do we get around that? How do we get to the next level? So on this next slide, I've just given a couple of examples of things that you want to think about on the infrastructure side. One of them is creating service tiers. And I think most companies have a service catalog. Have we looked at it recently? Is it the right number of service families? Do we offer businesses options on tiers? So the little chart I have on the right is just an example of if you had different services and the tiered storage is here, do you offer your customers different options and price points for different types of storage to try and incent a different behavior? So that's one thing you could do on the infrastructure side. The ongoing performance tuning, we typically do it to create efficiencies, but it's really about creating capacity on the infrastructure side. And so we want to focus on not just getting a 3%, economy year over year, but saying the capacity coming over the fence might be 10 or 12%. How do we deal with that, and how do we try and keep a flat budget while absorbing all that capacity? Leveraging vendors and pricing. Today, we sometimes manage vendors singly and independently, but the idea of running IT like a business is stepping back from that and looking at all your vendors, and you might be surprised to see that you might have 100 or 200 or in some cases 1,000 different vendors, and when you take a look at them, you find that perhaps a third of them you haven't done business with in a couple of years, and a third of them you have a heavy relationship with, and then you have this group in the middle that you do sporadic business. And so looking at your entire vendor list and trying to figure out how you forge the right relationships to maximize the value, and having fewer vendors with better pricing or better services is probably more important than having lots of vendors. And it also takes a lot of noise out of the system, and anytime you take noise out of the system, you're going to have a more efficient organization. Standardization, looking at across the infrastructure organization and the many organizations that use the infrastructure, how can we standardize? Because standardization creates efficiencies as well. And it's not meant to limit people, but it's really to give people choices to understand that the more we standardize, the better cost efficiency that we can have. Security and risk management is another thing around infrastructure. It's been a challenge for many, many years. Security is a big challenge for a lot of different companies because of the way the environment is today, and a lot of infrastructure organizations don't invest enough in security and risk management, and they're actually playing catch-up. So thinking about how you deal with that and how you put that into your multi-year plan to make sure that you're protecting your environment. And then the last one on here is linking services to applications and chargebacks. And perhaps it's not talking about MIPS and CPU hours and DASD and all that other stuff. Perhaps it's talking about what it takes to run an application. And one of the things that I've done is I've tried to present infrastructure from an application perspective, because business customers do understand what their applications are. If a business customer has a claim system, and we could explain to them from that system perspective where they're spending money on the infrastructure side, what they're using for storage, what they're using for computing power, and have conversations to understand more about the system and give them options to somehow reduce the cost, that would be a good thing. So that's how you start to create transparency. That's how you start to fill in that IT black hole and create these partnerships with the application folks and the business folks to look at IT end to end. Just to kind of wrap up the data management across all domains, application and infrastructure, it's really about one portfolio, looking at the big picture, but having the ability to drill down where you need to drill down, having reliable, actionable information, creating that financial transparency, and then having the ability to measure the results and do something with it. So, strategy for moving forward, my last segment. I know we're running slow. We're running out of time, so I'll move a little bit quickly. But as I thought about this, we have ERP systems for accounting. We have ERP systems for HR. And we actually don't have an ERP system for IT. And so I went online and I looked up the definition for ERP according to Wikipedia, and you can see it here. And it's all the things that we're talking about. It's management information, it's relationship management, it's integrated information. And so this concept of integrated IT portfolio analysis, or IIPA, and having tools for that is what I would consider our ERP for IT. And so when I think about building that effective IIPA solution, and it sounds like a lot of you are already down that path, there's a couple of things that you want to think about on your approach. One of them, and this is the way I think of things as a finance person, is you want it to be industrial strength, you want it to be repeatable, you want it to be scalable. So what does that mean? Industrial strength doesn't mean it's big or it's expensive. It simply means that it works, because there's lots of things out there that don't actually work. The idea of it being repeatable, you have to do it over and over again. And the scalable bit, in the companies that I've worked for, there hasn't been an instance where we haven't grown either organically or through acquisition, where having a platform to put things on made that whole integration much easier. So scalable becomes important as you look towards the future. The obstacles around people, process, and technology, we all know that those are the typical challenges, and people don't want to change, and it's not the way we did it today. You have to think about that, and you have to figure out a way to get around that. The reporting capabilities, again, this is really important. This is not to create tons of data to create more reports. This is about picking the right information and bubbling the right information and the actionable information that has metrics and insights to the tops. And so if you follow this approach, you're going to have the capability to have IT dashboards. You're going to be able to build an IT asset inventory to get an idea of what your applications are costing. You're going to be able to think about transformation and what you have to do to get there. Your financial transparency will be enhanced. Your chargeback methodologies will get better, and you'll be able to run scenarios and do what-ifs once you have the right data. And so before we do our next polling question, the last slide is what I call the IT financial maturity curve. And it's really about how to think about it, because different companies are in different places with different aspects of their portfolio. So the way I look at it is over time and maturity, how do you move along the curve? So the first level for me is getting the basics right and getting the control of the data and setting up this accountability so you know who's responsible for what results, and setting up a financial reporting scheme where everyone's looking at the same information. As you move up the curve, and you want to drive value, obviously you want to manage the portfolio both on the application side and the infrastructure side, and you want to create that financial transparency. And then as you get to the third level, it's all about optimizing and being able to look at meaningful dashboards and actionable information that you can actually make decisions on and perhaps even benchmark that data. And in some cases, we may be high on the maturity curve on the application side, but low on the infrastructure side. But the way I approach it is when I look at IT as a whole, where do we fit in? And this helps you figure out where your engagement level is with a company like UMT, where you might be at a different maturity level. You need to just work through where you are today and where you need to get to. Okay, so because of the interest of time, we're going to skip the second poll, and I'm just going to get into the last couple of slides. So getting started, just get the slide up. Okay, so this idea of where do you go from here? Well, a phased approach is going to work best. And the first thing I recommend is always engage the IT finance team, because they have the tools and they have the knowledge to help walk through what it is you want to accomplish. And with them, you want to develop a data framework and a strategy as to how you want to approach this and what some of your outcomes and outputs will be. You want to create a heat map, and there's an example of a heat map where you want to look at what your pain points are, and you want to rank and rate them to what's a strong pain point, what's not so strong. And once you have those, you want to prioritize those and develop an action plan. So on the next slide, there's just an example of picking a couple of different pain points, putting them into an action plan, and really figuring out what it is you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to fix each of those pain points. And in some instances, you're going to want to start with some quick wins or low-hanging fruit just to try and get people on board and get some momentum going. And in other cases, you're going to pick something that is truly a big issue and a big risk, and the sooner you get it nailed down, the better you are. So you're going to make choices as it relates to what your heat maps is and what it looks like. And so as I wrap up, what's the prize by taking this approach and stepping back and looking across the entire IT portfolio? Well, a couple of things. You're going to increase the strategic value of IT. You're going to maximize this concept of creating versus sustaining value. You're going to have a sustained efficiency and effectiveness. That's something that is not just a once-a-year thing. It's a way of life. It'll lead to increased transparency. And at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is drive revenue and earnings growth for the company. And so a high-performing organization is going to allow you to do all these things. And so the call to action, the burning platform, is there's huge financial and operational opportunities, particularly in the current environment. You know, when I talk to analysts about this, one thing they say is people ask, what are the things that I can do to be more efficient? That's the number one question that we hear. And so that's kind of the burning platform. And it is a big challenge. There's a lot of obstacles. But if you do it in stages, you're going to be able to start making progress. And then once you get the ball rolling, things will pick up for sure. And then, of course, the sooner you get started, the sooner you're going to start to see results. And so that's the end of my remarks. And I thank you for being a good audience. I'm going to hand it over to Ben, and he'll field the questions.
Thank you, Charlie. That was great webcast. What I also want to remind you guys is this was the first in a three-part series. So Charlie was really setting the scene today and some of the key concepts of running the business of IT. And on May the 9th, we'll drill down a little deeper and look at demystifying IT financial management by first taking a look at the application portfolio domain and looking at some of the key considerations when managing your application portfolio from a financial perspective. And then on May 23rd, we'll do the same, but this time focus on the infrastructure portfolio and some of the key considerations there. And during that same session, we'll look then, having tamed both the application side and the infrastructure side, how you can create bill of IT and total cost of ownership views from that combined data set. So if you haven't done so already, I would recommend that you please sign up for the other two sessions. They'll be very, very interesting. And please, you can visit umt.com to register for those and learn more about UMT 360 solution and UMT services. Again, I want to echo Charlie's comments and thank you all for attending today. There's a survey that has been posted that will allow you to provide us with feedback that we take seriously. So please take some time to do that. And we'll pause also for Q&A. So I know we're slightly over time, but if you have questions, please post them to the question manager, and we'll field them as they come in. Again, we want to thank you again for your attendance today, and we look forward for you attending future sessions. So we'll pause and wait for any questions to come in. I see the standard questions that around the slides and the content that was delivered today. Of course, we will make those available. The webcast recording will also be available within 24 hours or so, and you'll be hearing from the UMT team. So again, I'd like to thank you for your attendance today. I know we're slightly over time, so have a great rest of the day.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 2 minutes.